The wind here is older than memory, it carries no urgency. Only the endless, dry whisper of sand shifting against sand, a sound like the slow breathing of the earth itself. Before there were empires, before there were maps drawn by human hands, there was only this silence, this vast interior of a continent waiting to be crossed. To stand here, in the heart of ancient Asia, is to feel the immense weight of stillness. The sky above is a pale, diluted blue, bleached by the sun and the perpetual dust that hangs suspended in the air, blurring the line between earth and heaven. It is a landscape that demands patience, a place where time is not measured in hours or days, but in the slow erosion of stone and the majestic drift of the dunes. Welcome, travellers, to our shared journey into the past. Settle comfortably now, letting the worries of your present day fade like mist in the morning sun. We are a community of quiet explorers, seeking solace in the deep, rhythmic currents of history. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the calm, steady pace of this ancient world become your own. We have all the time we need. Long before the first heavy hooves of a camel caravan packed the earth into a discernible road, the geography had already destined this path to exist. Nature built colossal barriers, the soaring, ice-crowned ramparts of the Himalayas and the Pamirs, the roof of the world, which scraped the very underbelly of the stars. These mountains stood as silent sentinels, guarding the secrets of the East from the curiosity of the West. Below these frozen heights lay the great basins, the bowls of dust and heat. The Taklamakan, whose name implies a place from which one does not return, sat at the center, a majestic void. Yet, around its perilous edges, life found a fragile foothold. Tiny rivulets of snowmelt from the high peaks trickled down into the arid lowlands, creating slender ribbons of green, fragile oases that dotted the rim of the desert like scattered emeralds on a dusty cloak. These were the stepping stones, waiting for brave souls to leap from one to the other. Let us drift eastward now, following the rising sun to the very edge of the known world. Here the land softens. The brutal jaggedness of the high mountains gives way to fertile plains, fed by deep, slow-moving rivers that curve across the landscape like sleeping serpents. This is the cradle of the East, a land that has already seen thousand-year dynasties rise and fall like tides. It is here, in the grand capital of Chang'an, that our long thread begins to unspool. Imagine the city of Chang'an not as a ruin, but as it was in its first great flowering, under the mighty Han dynasty. It is a metropolis of 1 million souls, waking slowly before the dawn. The air is cool and damp, heavy with the scent of damp earth from the surrounding fields, and the faint, acrid tang of wood smoke from countless kitchen fires just beginning to catch. The city is a vast grid, an orderly reflection of the cosmos itself, laid out with absolute precision. Enormous wooden gates studded with iron currently stand shut, barring the night from the day. Inside those walls, the silence is slowly breaking. Listen closely to the sounds of the awakening city somewhere in the labyrinthine wards. A temple bell is struck, a deep, resonant boom that travels through the heavy morning air, vibrating in the chest more than the ears. It is a slow, deliberate sound, marking the immutable passage of time. Then, the soft sweeping of bamboo brooms against packed earth servants are clearing the courtyards of the previous day's dust, a ritual as reliable as the rising sun. The majestic wooden architecture of the city, with its sweeping tiled roofs that curve upward toward the heavens, looms dark and solid against the brightening grey of the sky. In the imperial district, the scale of life is almost unimaginable. Here, tranquility is manufactured through immense effort. Gardens that mimic wild mountains have been constructed by human hands, complete with moss-covered rocks and meticulously twisted pines. It is quiet here, too, but it is a different kind of silence, a silence born of awe and rigid protocol. Attendants in long silk robes glide through polished corridors, their soft-soled shoes making no sound on the lacquered wood floors. They move like ghosts, carrying gilded basins of perfumed water or trays of steaming millet gruel for the high officials who will soon begin the business of running an empire. And at the heart of this empire, the secret that will eventually bind the world together is already ancient. Far outside the city walls, In the endless quiet villages of the countryside, millions of tiny lives are chewing, chewing, chewing. The silkworms are feasting on fresh mulberry leaves. If you were to stand in one of these rearing houses, the sound would be immense yet soft, like the patter of heavy rain on a thatched roof. It is the sound of an empire's wealth being consumed and transmuted. Within weeks, these voracious eaters will fall silent, wrapping themselves in unbroken filaments of miraculous protein. They create tiny, perfect worlds of white, waiting for the boiling water that will unravel their labor. In the weaving workshops of Chang'an, the air is thick with humidity, necessary to keep the delicate threads from snapping. The grand looms, masterpieces of complex carpentry, creak rhythmically. Clack thump, it is a hypnotic, endless rhythm. Women with practiced, calloused hands send shuttles flying back and forth, trapping light within the weave. They are creating something that, to the rest of the world, seems impossible. A fabric as light as smoke, yet incredibly strong. It shimmers like captured water, cool to the touch in summer, surprisingly warm in winter. This is Sai, silk. It is more than just cloth here. It is currency. It is used to pay taxes, to buy peace from aggressive nomadic neighbors, to reward loyal generals. It is hoarded in imperial storehouses like bars of gold. Yet for all its sophistication, this empire is an island. To the north and west lie the barbarian lands, the endless steppes. Here, life is not based on settled grids and stone walls, but on movement, on the wheel and the hoof. The Xiongnu, masters of the horse, roam these vast grasslands. Their world is one of open sky and mobile tent cities, following the seasonal rains that feed their immense herds. To the settled people of Chang'an, they are a terrifying force of nature, as unpredictable as the storms that sweep down from the frozen north. There is a tension in the air of this ancient world, a pressure building between the settled, immovable object of the empire and the irresistible force of the nomadic ocean. The Great Wall, in its early earthen forms, stands as a desperate attempt to impose order on this chaotic frontier. But walls cannot stop the desire for what lies beyond them. In the imperial court, there are whispers of strange things seen by those few who dare to venture far into the western wastes. They speak of heavenly horses in a distant valley called Fergana, steeds that sweat blood and can run for 1,000 miles without tiring. The emperor, desiring these horses to fight the nomads on their own terms, looks westward with hungry eyes. They speak too of other dimmer things, rumors of tall men with colored eyes, of cities made of white stone that gleam in the sun, far beyond the great mountains. These rumors are fragile, carried across thousands of miles by word of mouth, changing with every telling until they sound like myths. Slowly, the idea begins to take root, the idea of a journey, not a raid, not a military march, but a probing into the unknown. It is a terrifying prospect. To leave the civilized world, to step past the Jade Gate, the final outpost of imperial control, is to walk off the edge of the map. Yet the pressure to connect continues to build. In the markets of Chang'an, amidst the familiar millet and pork, strange new items occasionally appear, brought by indirect, dangerously long chains of barter, a piece of dark, spinach green jade that did not come from known quarries, a pouch of dried pungent spice that numbs the tongue. These are the heralds of the future. They sit in the market stalls, quiet mysteries, sparking curiosity in the minds of brave or desperate men. And so, we find ourselves on the cusp of the great opening. The world is vast, separated by seemingly insurmountable voids of deserts and ice-locked peaks. On one side, the unimaginable wealth and intricate order of silk-clad China. On the other, far distant, the sun-drenched marble cities of Rome and Persia, completely unaware of the great dragon to the east. Between them lies only potential. The silence of the Taklamakan still reigns supreme, but the wind is changing. Soon, the first brave caravan will assemble, its bells ready to break the ancient quiet, stitching these separated worlds together, one slow, agonizing footstep at a time. The immense stillness of the Asian interior held its breath, a vast, dry lung of dust and ancient stone. For countless centuries, the great empires of the East and West had existed in splendid, if ignorant, isolation. Their grand narratives unfolded largely unaware of the other's existence, separated by a colossal geographical void, a chasm of deserts, mountains, and the endless, rolling steppes. In the imperial courts of Chang'an, the world was China. Everything beyond its meticulously cultivated borders was, by definition, less civilized, less ordered. The nomads to the north and west, the Xiongnu, were a persistent, irritating thorn, a wild force that constantly threatened the delicate balance of agricultural life. For generations, the Han dynasty had wrestled with the Xiongnu problem. Sometimes, they bought peace with lavish gifts of silk and grain, a humiliating but often necessary capitulation. Other times, they dispatched vast armies, only to see them swallowed by the vastness of the steppe, struggling against an enemy that refused to stand and fight in the civilized manner. The Xiongnu, swift as the wind on their magnificent horses, would strike like lightning and vanish like smoke. Their strength lay in their mobility, their mastery of the bow from horseback, and their intimate knowledge of the unforgiving landscape. To fight them, the Han needed horses that could match their speed and endurance. And so, the catalyst for the Silk Road's true beginning was born not from a desire for trade, but from a desperate military necessity. The Emperor Wu of Han, a man of immense ambition and strategic foresight, looked beyond the immediate threat, far into the blurry horizons of the West. He had heard the tantalizing whispers of heavenly horses from a land called Fergana, far beyond the Pamir Mountains. These were not the sturdy, common ponies of the Han Plains. These were powerful, swift steeds, reputedly capable of sweating blood, a sign of their divine origin, or perhaps just their immense physical exertion in the brutal heat. Emperor Wu understood that whoever controlled these horses would control the steppes. To acquire them, however, meant venturing into the unknown, traversing lands that were little more than myths to the Han court. In the year 138 BCE, a man named Zhang Qian was chosen for this perilous mission. He was a loyal court official, a man of courage and keen intellect, but no one, not even Zhang Qian himself, could have truly comprehended the scale of the odyssey upon which he was about to embark. His mission was clear: travel west, find allies among the western regions to fight the Xiongnu, and crucially, secure those legendary horses. Imagine Zhang Qian's small retinue assembling at the westernmost gates of Chang'an. The air, even at this early hour, already carries the day's coming heat, the clatter of their few pack animals, the muted murmuring of the guards, the jingle of harness fittings. These are the only sounds breaking the morning quiet. As they pass through the final checkpoints, the scent of the city, a blend of cooking fires, human activity, and rich earth, slowly gives way to the drier, dustier scent of the open countryside. The well-trodden paths of the empire gradually thin out, becoming mere tracks in the dirt, heading towards the looming, indistinct mountains in the west. Day after day, they travel. The rhythm of the journey takes over, the slow, steady plod of their animals, the endless creak of leather, the taste of dust on the tongue. The familiar, comforting scent of fertile fields fades entirely, replaced by the sharper, wilder smell of dry grasses and resilient desert scrub. The landscape itself becomes a character, vast and indifferent. The sky, once a familiar Han blue, seems to stretch infinitely, an overwhelming dome that dwarfs the small band of travelers. The sun beats down with an relentless intensity, turning the air into a shimmering veil. The sun itself is a constant, watchful eye. In the mornings, it paints the eastern sky with soft, diffuse golds and oranges, promising another day of arduous travel. By midday, it is a searing orb, directly overhead, bleaching all color from the landscape, pushing the heat into every pore. And then, they encounter the Xiongnu. Not as allies, but as captors. Zhang Qian and his entire retinue are overwhelmed, their mission abruptly halted. This is not a quick skirmish. This is a prolonged, grinding captivity that will stretch for 10 long years. 10 years of living among his captors, learning their language, their customs, their way of life. 10 years of the bitter taste of helplessness, yet also an invaluable, albeit unintended, education. During this decade, Zhang Qian is not idle. He observes, he listens, he learns. He learns the subtle nuances of nomadic politics, the intricate clan loyalties, the vast distances they travel. He sees how they manage their herds, how they thrive in a land that would crush a Han farmer. He even marries a Xiongnu woman and fathers a child, a silent testament to the long passage of time and the human capacity to adapt, even in captivity. The rhythmic movements of nomadic life, the packing of tents, the breaking of camp, the endless ride across the steppes, become his own. The scent of their world saturates his senses. The sharp, animalistic tang of horse sweat and leather, the smoky aroma of dung fires, the faint, metallic scent of blood from freshly slaughtered game. The wind, still ancient and indifferent, now carries these new, wilder scents. But the fire of his mission still burns, a persistent ember in his heart. He yearns to complete his imperial duty, to return to the ordered world of Chang'an with the knowledge he has gathered. Finally, after a decade, Zhang Qian seizes an opportunity to escape. He takes his Xiongnu wife and child, along with his loyal guide, Ganfu, and rides westward, deeper into the unknown, choosing not to return home immediately, but to fulfill his original mandate. He continues his journey, encountering more distant peoples. He reaches Dayuan, Fergana, the land of the heavenly horses, and sees them with his own eyes. They are indeed magnificent, powerful, unlike anything in China. He travels further still, reaching Sogdiana, Bactria, and even dimly perceives the existence of Parthia and the distant Roman Empire. He gathers intelligence on their customs, their military strengths, their trade goods. He sees products in these Western markets that intrigue him. Grapes, which China does not yet cultivate, alfalfa, perfect for feeding horses, even hints of fine carpets and glassware. His journey westward is an odyssey of endurance, curiosity, and sheer willpower. He faces treacherous terrain, hostile tribes, and the endless psychological burden of being utterly disconnected from his homeland. He learns that the world is far larger, far more diverse, and far more interconnected than the Han court could ever have imagined. He sees that while empires rise and fall, human beings share a fundamental desire for connection, for exchange. Finally, after 13 years away, Zhang Xian begins the long, arduous journey back to Chang'an. He carries with him not just the memory of the heavenly horses, but a vast mental map of the world beyond the Han frontier. He has witnessed incredible civilizations, learned of peoples who trade with goods unknown in the East. He has seen the potential for a grand network of exchange, not just of goods but of ideas, of culture. His return is not without further peril. Again, he is captured by the Xiongnu, but this time, he manages to escape relatively quickly, leaving his wife and child behind, a painful testament to the brutal demands of his mission. When Zhang Qian finally steps through the gates of Chang'an in 125 BCE, he is no longer the young official who left 13 years prior. His beard is streaked with grey, his face etched with the lines of relentless sun and wind, but his eyes hold the wisdom of immense distances. He brings back only a single companion from his original retinue, his loyal guide, Ganfu, and a story that will change the course of history. Zhang Qian's reports ignite the imagination of the Han court. The heavenly horses are no longer a myth but a tangible goal. The western regions are not just barbarian wastes, but lands filled with potential allies and exotic goods. Emperor Wu, listening to Zhang Qian's tales, understands the true strategic and economic implications. The long isolation of China is about to end. The catalyst has been laid. The threads of connection are about to be woven across the vast, indifferent heart of the world. The whispers of Zhang Qian's journey spread beyond the imperial court, reaching the ears of merchants, adventurers, and even restless, ambitious farmers. The world, for the first time, truly feels larger. The lure of the unknown, the promise of exotic riches, begins to stir in the hearts of many. The stage is now set. The first hesitant steps have been taken. The colossal barriers of mountain and desert, once impassable, now seem merely challenging. The ancient silence is about to be broken by the rhythmic plod of camel caravans, carrying the destiny of two worlds on their backs. The path had been found. Now it had to be forged. Zhang Qian's odyssey had proven that a world existed beyond the Han horizon, a world hungry for what China could provide. But knowing the way and walking it with 1,000 pounds of precious cargo were two very different things. In the bustling markets of Chang'an, a new kind of industry began to take shape, slow and deliberate as the turning of a colossal wheel. It was not merely about gathering goods, it was about engineering survival for a journey that might last years. Merchants, men with eyes as sharp as abacuses, spent months in preparation. They knew that once they passed the Jade Gate, the Empire's protection ended. Every item carried had to justify its weight in gold or water. Silk was the anchor of every load. It was light, it was durable, and its value increased with every agonizing mile it traveled west. But it had to be protected from the relentless, ubiquitous dust that would soon become their entire world. Workers with calloused hands spent endless days wrapping these precious bolts in layers of rough hemp and oiled leather, binding them tightly to withstand the inevitable abrasive storms. The smell of these packing yards was a thick, heady mix of raw leather, tung oil, and the underlying musky scent of the beasts that would carry it all. Ah, the beasts. The true heroes of this long road were not the men, but the Bactrian camels. These were creatures perfectly evolved for the hell they were about to enter. They were massive, shaggy giants, with two great humps of fat that served as their reservoirs against starvation. Unlike the skittish horses of the steppe, the camels moved with a slow, deliberative placidity. Their broad, padded feet splayed out with every step, preventing them from sinking into the soft, treacherous sands that would swallow a narrower hoof. They could smell water from miles away, their long slitted nostrils able to close tightly against driving sandstorms. They could eat thorns and salty scrub that no other animal would touch, and they could drink brine that would poison a man. They were the living ships of this dry, endless ocean. When a caravan finally assembled, it was a moving city. Hundreds of animals, their loads perfectly balanced, stood waiting in the pre-dawn greyness. There were merchants, hired guards with scarred faces and wary eyes, camel drivers who spoke rough dialects of the borderlands, and interpreters who knew the strange tongues of the West. The departure was always a solemn affair. To leave Chang'an for the West was to accept that you might never return. Family members would offer tearful farewells at the city gates, watching until the last dusty tail of the last camel disappeared into the haze of the horizon. The first leg of the journey led them through the Hexi corridor, the throat of China. It was a long, narrow passage flanked by the towering, snow-capped Kilian Mountains to the south and the forbidding Gobi Desert to the north. Here, they were still technically within the empire, protected by a growing line of earthen watchtowers that snaked westward. These towers were the eyes of the emperor, relaying smoke signals by day and fire by night, a primitive telegraph system that could send news of a Xiongnu raid from the frontier to the capital in a matter of hours. Travelling through the corridor was a sensory education in gradual desolation. The lush fields of the interior gave way to tough, scrubby grasslands. The air grew drier, thinner, sharpening the light so that distant peaks looked deceptively close. The wind here was constant, channeled by the mountains into a relentless force that scoured everything in its path. It sang a lonely, whistling song through the rocks, a constant companion that grated on the nerves of novice travellers. Finally, after weeks of travel, they would reach Dunhuang. This was the last great outpost, the final refueling station before the plunge into the true void. Dunhuang was a bustling, chaotic junction. Here, caravans would stock up on their most critical supply, water. Thousands of goatskin bags were filled, sealed with pitch, and loaded onto the protesting camels. It was also here that travellers prayed. Just outside the city, in the cliffs of Mogao, the first caves were being carved by monks and terrified merchants seeking divine protection for the ordeal ahead. They left offerings of silk and silver, hoping to bribe fate. Beyond Dunhuang lay the Jade Gate, the Yumen Pass. Passing through it was a psychological threshold as much as a physical one. Soldiers would check their travel documents, wooden slips bearing imperial seals, one last time. Once through those gates, the silence of the Taklamakan descended upon them instantly. The name itself was whispered with dread. place of no return. It was a sea of shifting sands, larger than many kingdoms. There was no single road here. The Silk Road was a shifting network of faint tracks, dictated by the location of tiny, precarious water sources. Caravans had to choose: skirt the northern rim under the blazing heat of the flaming mountains, or take the southern route along the icy foothills of the Kunlun Range. Both were treacherous. In the heart of the desert, the heat could kill a man in hours. They travelled mostly by night to avoid the brutal sun. Imagine the experience of those night marches. The air, so hot by day, would plummet to freezing temperatures. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic squelch of camel pads on sand, the creak of leather loads, and the mesmerizing, seemingly endless ringing of the lead camel's massive iron bell. That bell was their lifeline. In the pitch black, if a traveller fell behind, the sound of the bell was the only thing to guide them back to safety. To lose the sound of the bell was to die. They navigated by the stars, just as sailors did on the ocean. The guides, often local men who had the desert map burned into their minds, could read the subtle shifts in the dunes, the colour of the sand, even the smell of the wind, to find the next well. Sometimes they would hear the singing sands. Under certain conditions, the shifting grains would emit a low, booming hum, like distant drums or wailing spirits. It was a terrifying natural phenomenon that fueled countless legends of demons and ghosts haunting the wastes. Days would bleed into weeks. The water in the goatskins would grow warm, slimy, and taste distinctly of tar and animal hide. Yet it was more precious than the silk they carried. Rations were hard, dry biscuits and salted meat that did little to quench the relentless thirst. And then, just as endurance reached its breaking point, a smudge of darkness would appear on the horizon. Not a mirage this time, but real tangible life. Reaching an oasis like Turpan was like being reborn. The temperature dropped instantly under the canopy of ancient poplar trees and trellised grapevines. Here, water didn't just exist, it flowed. The ingenious Kares system, underground tunnels that brought snowmelt from the distant mountains without it evaporating in the sun, watered lush fields of melons, cotton, and grapes in the middle of a terrifying desert. Turpan was a world entirely different from Chang'an. It was a melting pot. Here, the Han merchants first encountered in large numbers the peoples of the central continent. The Sogdians with their pointed beards and astute trading minds. The Tocharians with their strange, almost European features. Languages mixed in the marketplaces. A babel of Chinese, Gandhari, Sogdian, and languages now long lost to time. They traded news as avidly as goods. Who was charging high taxes further west? Which tribal confederation was currently raiding the southern route? Where were the best prices for raw jade? For the caravans, these oases were islands of safety where they could rest, restock, and repair. But they were only temporary stops. The road always called them back. The journey was far from over. Beyond these first oases lay even higher mountains, stranger kingdoms, and eventually, the great markets of the true West. They had left the known world behind, and were now deep in the crucible that would forge the greatest trade network in human history. Leaving the relative safety of the oases behind, the caravans faced their greatest physical trial, the ascent into the Pamir Mountains, known to the ancients as the Onion Mountains for the wild alliums that grew on their lower slopes. They were more accurately called the roof of the world. Here, the very air thinned, becoming a breathless, icy void. Men and animals gasped for oxygen in the high altitude. The placid camels, so invincible in the desert heat, now struggled on icy, treacherous paths, barely wide enough for their hooves. Slips were fatal. The gorges below were littered with the frozen bones of those who had misstepped. A grim memento mori for every traveller who passed. The cold was a physical assault, biting through layers of wool and fur, freezing exposed skin in minutes. Yet, they pushed on, driven by the immense potential of what lay on the other side. Crossing the high passes, they descended at last into a new world, the Fergana Valley, and beyond it, the ancient lands of Sogdiana and Bactria. This was a landscape unlike anything in the Han Empire. It was a crossroads of civilizations, a place where Greek, Persian, and Indian influences had been mingling for centuries, long before the first Chinese silk arrived. The cities here, Samarkand, Bukhara, Balkh, were ancient and deeply cosmopolitan. They had been touched by Alexander the Great centuries before, and faint echoes of Hellenistic culture still lingered in their art and architecture. Entering Samarkand was an assault on the senses. It was the great emporium of Central Asia. The markets here were legendary, vast labyrinths of shaded stalls where literally anything could be bought. Here, the Chinese merchants, exhausted and far from home, would finally offload their precious silk. They rarely travelled further west themselves. Instead, they sold their cargoes to the masters of the middle road, the Sogdians. The Sogdians were the supreme merchants of the ancient world. They were the glue that held the entire Silk Road together. They spoke a language that became the lingua franca of trade, and they established communities, trading colonies, all along the routes, from Chang'an to the borders of Persia. In these Samarkand markets, the direction of goods reversed. Chinese merchants used their silk profits to buy the exotic wonders of the West to take back home. They bought magnificent blood-sweating horses, now peacefully traded rather than fought over. They bought precious stones, deep blue lapis lazuli from the mines of Badakhshan, spinels that looked like rubies. They bought strange new foods that would revolutionize Chinese cuisine. Golden peaches, sweet grapes that could be dried into raisins for long journeys, crunchy walnuts, fragrant coriander, and cucumbers. Crucially, they also encountered new ideas. It was along these same dusty paths that Buddhism began its slow, inexorable migration eastward from India. Monks hitched rides with caravans, carrying sutras instead of silk, planting the seeds of a faith that would eventually transform East Asia. From Sogdiana, the goods, now in the hands of new merchants, continued westward. They crossed the Grand Plateau of Iran through the mighty Parthian Empire. Parthia was another massive gatekeeper. The Parthians were fierce warriors, famous for their Parthian shot from horseback, but they were also shrewd middlemen. They eagerly taxed the passing trade, growing incredibly wealthy without ever needing to produce the silk themselves. Finally, after passing through dozens of hands, traveling thousands of miles over deserts, mountains, and plateaus, the goods would reach the uttermost west, the Roman Empire. To the Romans, China was a mythical land they called Ceres, the land of silk. They had no real concept of where it was, imagining perhaps that silk grew on trees, yet they craved it with an almost decadent hunger. Silk became the ultimate status symbol in Rome. It was so expensive that it was literally worth its weight in gold. Moralists in the Senate railed against it, calling it decadent and effeminate, complaining that it drained the empire's coffers of gold and silver, which flowed relentlessly eastward to pay for this insatiable luxury. But the demand was unstoppable. The Silk Road had become a global artery. It was a tenuous, fragile, yet incredibly resilient thread that bound the known world together, driven by the universal human desires for wealth, novelty, and beauty. By the time of the mighty Tang dynasty in China, centuries after Jiang Qian's lonely first steps, the Silk Road had matured into a golden age of unprecedented vibrancy. It was no longer just a tentative thread. It was a roaring river of commerce and culture, a superhighway of the medieval world. The Tang Empire, cosmopolitan and supremely confident, sat at the center of this whirling web. Its capital, Chang'an, had become arguably the greatest city on earth, a metropolis where 1 million people lived within the walls and another 1 million just outside them. It was a city drunk on the exotic. Fashion in Chang'an was heavily influenced by the West. Women rode horses wearing Persian-style trousers and boots, a shocking departure from traditional Han modesty. They painted their faces with strange new cosmetics and listened to foreign music. Orchestras from distant desert kingdoms like Kucha played in the imperial court. Their wildly energetic rhythmic music, so different from the stately chimes of ancient China, sparked a dance craze that swept through the city's taverns and aristocratic mansions alike. The Hu, the generic term for Western foreigners, particularly Sogdians and Turks, were everywhere. They ran wine shops that served potent grape wine instead of traditional rice brew. They were moneylenders, jewelers, and entertainers. Religious tolerance was a hallmark of this golden age. Alongside the great Buddhist monasteries and Taoist temples, strange new houses of worship appeared. There were Nestorian Christian churches, their stone steles carved with both cross and lotus flower, preaching a luminous religion from the distant west. There were Zoroastrian fire temples, where Persian exiles kept their sacred flames burning thousands of miles from their conquered homeland. Later, the first mosques would appear, serving the growing community of Muslim traders. The road itself was now better managed, guarded by a string of powerful Tang military garrisons that stretched deep into Central Asia. These 4 garrisons of Anxi ensured that the Pax Sinica, the Chinese peace, extended well beyond the Pamirs, making travel safer than it had ever been. This security allowed for an explosion of art and culture along the route. The Mogo caves at Dunhuang reached their artistic apogee. Wealthy merchants and powerful generals commissioned increasingly grand caves, filling them with murals that were a stunning fusion of Chinese, Indian, and Central Asian artistic styles. Yet, even at its height, the seeds of change were being sown. The very success of the road attracted new, powerful players who wanted to control it. To the west, a new and unstoppable force had risen from the Arabian deserts: Islam. The armies of the Caliphate were pushing swiftly eastward, conquering Persia and advancing into Sogdiana, bringing a new faith and a new imperial order. To the south, the Tibetan Empire, fierce and expansionist from their high plateau, constantly threatened to cut the vital arteries of the road in the Tarim Basin. The inevitable clash came in the year 751 at the distant Talas River. Tang imperial troops met the encroaching Abbasid Arab armies. It was a decisive defeat for the Tang, marking the absolute westernmost limit of Chinese military expansion. While not immediately catastrophic for trade, it signaled a shifting of the tectonic plates of power. Central Asia began its slow, centuries-long conversion to Islam, gradually changing the cultural character of the entire region. But an even greater catastrophe struck from within. The An-Lushan rebellion devastated the Tang heartland. The empire, fighting for its very survival, had to recall its garrisons from the west. Overnight, the protective umbrella of the Tang vanished from the Silk Road. The oasis kingdoms were left to fend for themselves against Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other nomadic powers. Trade didn't stop. The hunger for luxury is eternal, but it became far more dangerous, fragmented and localized. The golden age of a single, unified superhighway under imperial protection had come to a slow, agonizing end. Yet, even in this twilight, one final, unintended gift passed from east to west, perhaps more valuable than all the silk ever woven. Among the prisoners taken at Talas were Chinese papermakers. In Samarkand, they taught their captors the secret of turning rags and mulberry bark into a smooth, writable surface. This technology would slowly travel westward, eventually reaching Baghdad, then Cairo, then Cordoba, and finally, centuries later, Europe, where it would help spark the Renaissance. The grand era was over, but the transmission of ideas continued, carried now not by imperial decree but by the resilient, stubborn momentum of history itself. Time, like the desert wind, eventually buries all things. The great overland routes, once the throbbing arteries of the world, began a slow, centuries-long slide into obsolescence. It was not a sudden death, but a gradual fading, a shifting of the world's attention. The sea, once terrifying and untamable, was finally being mastered. Massive ocean-going junks from Song and later Ming China, and swiftly improving Arab dhows, began to carry goods faster, cheaper, and in vastly greater quantities than any camel caravan ever could. A single ship could carry the load of 1,000 camels, without needing to be fed or watered, and without paying taxes to every petty desert chieftain along the way. The final blow came with the fragmentation of the great Mongol Empire, which had briefly, miraculously, revived the entire route under one brutal but secure peace, the Pax Mongolica. When that colossal empire fractured into warring khanates, the road became too dangerous, too expensive, and finally, too untraveled. The desert, patient and relentless, reclaimed its own. Cities that had once boasted cosmopolitan populations, thriving markets, and grand temples were slowly abandoned. Their water systems failed. Their walls crumbled, and the sands marched in through the open gates. For centuries, the Western world largely forgot the intricate details of this ancient connection. China became a distant, closed memory again, a land of legend rather than a trading partner. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that a new breed of traveller, archaeologists and explorers from Europe, arrived, driven not by silk, but by a hunger for the past. They dug into the sand-buried ruins of Taklamakan cities and found miraculous things. They found perfectly preserved bodies, desiccated by the dry desert air, still wearing the colourful woolen robes they had died in 2,000 years ago. They found documents, receipts for grain, letters home written by lonely soldiers, Buddhist sutras in languages no one had spoken for a millennium. These fragments are the ghosts that now speak to us. They tell us that the people of the Silk Road were not so different from us. They worried about money, they missed their families, they sought spiritual comfort, and they loved beautiful things. The legacy of the Silk Road is not in the ruins it left behind, but in the world it created. It was the first true globalization. It proved that no culture, no matter how mighty, exists in a vacuum. Every time you eat a plate of pasta, a descendant of noodles that likely travelled west, or play a guitar, a distant cousin of the Central Asian lute, you are touching a faint, vibrating thread of that ancient web. We are all, in some way, children of this great exchange, the genetic, cultural, and technological tapestry of our modern world was first woven on those dusty, dangerous tracks. And now, as the night deepens around us, let us return one last time to that eternal silence. The caravans are gone, the bells have ceased their ringing, the merchants and their dreams have all turned to dust, but the wind still blows, soft and untroubled, over the endless sands. It is a quiet that is not empty, but full of the memories of millions of footsteps that once walked this way, brave and hopeful, under the same indifferent stars. Sleep now, travellers. The road is long, but the journey is done. Rest in the quiet knowledge that you are part of a story that never truly ends.